here we are again with another crack at what we're calling attempted intelligence. Attempt to restate the goal of what we're doing here. It's to have these conversations that we would have anyways, to bring up some concepts and work our way through them so that we can not only interrupt our own forgetting curve and help reinforce the knowledge that we're learning, but also so that we can attempt to share this information in a way that might be accessible. And then also in doing so, we're implicitly developing skills for ourselves, skills of communication, skills of understanding, skills of disseminating information. So what we're doing for the first little while, so last time we talked about the Dunning-Kruger curve, right? But for the next few attempts at this attempted intelligence conversation, we're going to talk about some basic pieces of the philosophy of science so that when we go forward, we have something to stand on, right? So what we're going to talk about today, or attempt to talk about, is the concept of deontology versus teleology, right? So we'll talk about that concept, and then as we go forward, we'll talk about things like epistemology, or essentially theories of knowledge, or theories of knowledge creation in a way that I would say it. But we want to talk about these so that we can highlight the underlying assumptions of scientific investigation and the underlying assumptions that most of us have in many of the things that we do that we can't acknowledge. So the hope here is to talk about these things so that in your own day-to-day life, you can maybe start to understand the positions that you're coming from, and that other positions or other ideas or other approaches exist. So, like I said, we're going to talk about deontology and teleology. So I brought this up to you. I said, this is what we're going to talk about. And then what did you find?
For teleontology, I didn't...
Teleology.
Teleology, sorry. Teleology. Okay. I did only glance at the word.
That's okay.
Yeah, teleology.
And I'll correct the word, not for, dominance, right? But more so that when we're having the conversation, the accuracy exists. Not just because I like accuracy, but because it helps.
Yes. Well, and also for anyone else who's going to see it, it would be more accurate.
Yeah. Okay. So teleology.
Teleology. Yeah. I did not find anything that was helpful for me to understand really what that was.
Okay. What did it give you? What you forget the specific examples you already told me, and my commentary on the example that you gave me is those are people that don't talk to people.
Yes.
Right. So they're explaining the idea. I can get the way that they're explaining the idea, but they don't talk to people, which is I'm like, why would you do that? But anyways, to not necessarily beat somebody and insult them, but.
I did get one sentence out of it, and I don't know if it is accurate, but it said something about it was almost the existence of a concept or idea versus the use of it, or the way that it's used.
Okay, sure.
Sure. And that was it, and I went, okay, I need an example, and then I got that horrible example. Okay. I got confused.
Sure.
For deontology, it seemed like, I don't know how to base it in a general idea, but it was around the idea that there's a set of rules or a set of guidelines in which people would behave or think, and they're deemed to be good or bad.
Okay.
And when you act in a certain way, they are measured by the set laws or rules established.
So, really straightforward, not complete way to say both of them is because they are often brought up in comparison to one another. So deontology, you're duty-based.
Okay.
You will do it because you're supposed to.
Okay.
Right. So there's some underlying agreement that these are the rules and you will follow them no matter what the outcome.
Okay.
Teleology is outcome-based. So your actions are based on you getting to the desired outcome.
So does that mean you would do whatever it takes to get to that desired outcome?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. But you judge the value of something. So you judge whether something's good or bad based on whether or not it's a rule follower or it's an outcome getter.
So it would be good or bad based on the one side, me getting closer to my outcome, my goal, and then the other one is, hey, it's good because I'm following the rules.
You did the right thing, or the ends justify the means. So teleology could be an analog for the ends justify the means. It's like, yeah, I did something evil, but everybody benefited, right? Versus I did what was right, and everybody got hurt.
Okay.
Right? So you kind of have different things. The negative thing or the bad thing happens on one end, right? But in either sense, we have the opportunity to absolve ourselves.
So is this an ideology where it's for our personal justification of our actions?
I would say that when you are trying to justify your actions, you're doing one of these or the other. You're invoking the concepts that are described by these words because you're trying to justify what you've done. Now, if you're trying to justify it because you did the right thing, you followed the rules, deontology, duty-based. If you're trying to justify yourself because you got the outcome, then that's teleology.
What stops you from taking the one that's most convenient for you at the time?
Absolutely nothing. And this is the problem.
Okay.
So this is why I want to have these conversations because, so a lot of these words are ancient Greek, right? So the philosophy of science is heavily influenced by Greek words, right? There's lots of reasons for that, which are things that have occurred through history, and you can judge those as good or bad, but they've happened, this is where we are, right? So if these are Greek words, which relate to ancient Greek culture and ancient Greek concepts, it suggests that there are people in the past who happen to have lived in a very specific location that figured some of this out, and we haven't necessarily done a good job of disseminating this through our population so that we can understand what the hell we're actually doing, or that somebody existed before us that can enlighten us as to what we're doing. Now, a lot of people have, right? But most of us, the large majority of us, can identify this process, and then depending on where we stand in relation to it, we'll flip to the other side. So there is nothing that stops us from choosing either one, right? So and this is the challenge, right? So sorry, I'm interrupting you guys' thoughts.
No, it was just entering because we're talking about nothing stops us from deciding either or at our convenience, but at the same time, I feel like no one's really pushing us to either way either. So no one's saying, hey, even like political parties, whatever it is, hey, this is our mindset, this is what we're going to do. So if you guys are following the rules, this is our duty, this is what we should all be doing. No one says these words. No one uses these words.
Implicit, it's implied.
It is. But at the same time, I don't hear in general socialization where people are talking, having conversations going, you should really do this because, it's the best for everyone. It's just one of those things where it goes, it's easier. A lot of people just pick what's easier.
Sure. So we can both acknowledge that depending on situation, we will justify ourselves more duty-based or more outcome-based, so more deontology or more teleology. And that depending on the situation and where you stand and how you feel about something, you'll flip to one or the other.
Right.
Now, this isn't necessarily scientific in and of itself, but based on your experiences, would you say that most people that you've encountered will use a mixed strategy? They'll use one or the other to make themselves feel better or absolve themselves or justify.
In my experience,
essentially whatever's convenient. Would you say that most people will do whatever's convenient with respect to justification?
I'm just thinking of because you're the end justifies the means. Yeah, because I was thinking really what it is it's not a mixture of people using the mixture of the two ideas. It's me encountering a mixture of people who use those separate ideas.
Sure.
So I've seen both of them, but they're in separate.
They live in separate people.
Right.
Okay. So what I would say, and this is where the next conversation that we have, where we talk about epistemologies, this can get cleared up a little bit more, right? Or maybe we can lay some groundwork to make this conversation more clear. But the basic idea is, I would say that in my experience, I know people using a mixed strategy depending on what they're trying to justify.
Okay.
Right. So let's just say you're playing sports, right? And you're on a team. You lost, but you played hard. You left it all out on the field, right? So that's a deontological argument to say, yeah, I lost, but I tried hard.
Okay.
And the duty is for me to try hard.
Right.
Right. And that I've learned something. right? And I left it all out on the field. Then the teleology would be, yeah, he accidentally poked him in the eye, but he won. Right? So if you're talking about a fight sport, you know, checking distance and accidentally poking somebody in the eye, it's like, yeah, and then did that diminish your opponent? Yes, it diminished my opponent. Did I mean to do it? No, but I did win. Right? So it's the ends justify the means are, in the sports context, people who bend the rules to gain an advantage. They don't break the rules, they bend them to gain an advantage, and then they win. So their justification is, I won.
What if they bend the rules and lose?
Well, then what they're probably going to do is try to absolve and put it somewhere else.
And justify
say bad refereeing, bad officiating.
I was going to say justify why they bent the rules.
No, because what they'll do is okay, so this is making a judgment call. What you might see as a strategy is if I bend the rules and I lose, I will try to say that the rules were not enforced appropriately. That's my strategy, right? If I stay teleological.
Right.
But what I can do otherwise is I can flip. I can go deontology. Well, I bent the rules because I'm supposed to do everything I can to win. My duty is to play hard.
Right.
My duty is to attempt to strategize and win.
Right.
So you can flip it, right? Now, this is where it becomes really hairy and really weird. Or not necessarily weird, but difficult to wade through because there may be multiple layers and multiple times at which I switch. So when I'm playing the game, I'm trying to be outcome-based. When I'm done the game and I'm trying to justify why I was outcome-based, I become duty-based, right? It's a really interesting slope. It's a really interesting thing that you can slide down and get lost in the mud.
Does that mean that when you're on the deontology side and someone...
So when you say deontology, what I'm going to suggest for your sake is to say it and tag it with another description of it so that you remember it better. Right, so when you say deontology, what are the other things that I've called deontology?
Duty.
Duty-based?
Yeah, duty-based.
Right, okay.
And the other one's outcome-based.
Okay, so there you go. So I'm going to suggest this, and this is also not just for me and you, but it's stimulus print.
Yeah.
Right, so it's almost like a mind mapping strategy.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
That's what you're saying.
So that when you do it, so when I do it, you hear me say it in multiple ways. Part of that's for me to remember it better and be able to use it better.
Well, it's a word that I'm not used to using either, so that makes sense.
So if you tag them and you put them together, then when somebody says one of them, you can make the association. So when you say deontology, so please excuse me for interrupting you, but it's also for the benefit of anybody who may choose to watch this that tagging them together is helpful. So deontology, duty-based, and I messed you up.
No, so hashtag duty-based. So we're talking, I was just talking about like, I played on lots of sports teams, and you have these people who try their best.
Yeah,
and
they're not very good.
Well, that's the thing though, right? So someone's best is possibly higher or lower than another best. So when you do your best and you lose, I find a lot of these people getting angry at the other people on the team saying, you could have done better.
Yeah.
You could have done this. So they're really staying inside that duty-based idea where saying, hey, I put in all my effort, how come your effort didn't match mine?
Well, possibly because we have different worldviews and we have different underlying assumptions. One of us might be more one of us might be more the other. We may flip, right? So these are ways to describe justification processes, at least the way that we're wielding them. Now, in the philosophy of science, maybe this isn't exactly the way it pans out, but for the purpose of our discussions and for the purpose of us interfacing with the world and attempting to see what might be going on and how people are kind of couching the justification for their action, we can do it this way, right? So it's one of the reasons I don't like team sports, because I don't like my success being predicated, or my success or failure being predicated on the efforts of others. I'd rather succeed or fail on my own, right? I like that better. I function better that way. It doesn't mean I can't play on teams, because I played a lot of basketball. Now, that said, somebody's saying that they're really rigid in their duty-based or their deontological position, they wouldn't say either. They would say, I tried hard, and you didn't. So then what you have is, because there's these different worldviews, you have friction.
Okay.
Right? So we have different underlying assumptions, and neither one of us is able to acknowledge them. We fight.
So are we gravitating towards like justifying regular everyday arguments?
If you attempt to use these concepts, right, as something that you can attempt to look through as a lens, right, or you use these in a united way where both of them exist, it's not absolutely binary,
right,
but both of them exist, and you look at everyday actions of people, then you could say they fall more into one or another, right? So the person on the highway who drives will not even touch the speed limit because the speed limit is maximum allowable.
Yeah.
Whereas you have then that's duty.
Yes.
You have other people who say, if I'm going to go with the flow of traffic,
Right.
if I go with the flow of traffic, nobody has to react to me in an undue fashion or a fashion that's too fast or too slow.
And the flow is consistent with everything.
Now, if the flow of traffic is considerably faster than the maximum allowable speed limit, then we have a clash of worldviews.
Yes.
The person who will not touch the speed limit is going to yell at all those who are going with the flow. The ones who are going with the flow are going to yell at the one that's duty bound. We have a grounds for friction because we have an underlying assumption that doesn't match.
Which would be road rage.
It could express itself that way. Now, so when you're talking about looking at everyday actions, I would say that you can use this as a way to attempt to understand them,
Right.
and where the conflict can begin. Now, there are other underlying assumptions that can be described in different ways, but with teleology versus deontology, or duty-based versus outcome-based approaches to things, we can see a very simplistic way that we develop some of this friction in some of these fights. So, and the fact that as humans, we may very well use a mixed strategy. We may flip depending on what's going on. Right? So when somebody's yelling at you, and you're saying, "I'm already doing this," right? Like I'm already doing what I'm supposed to do, right? Then you get these opportunities for this friction. So I think what I'm hoping to point to is that no matter what we as individuals are doing, so we talked about the Dunning-Kruger curve and blind spots. Well, we're not good at identifying our blind spots because they're blind spots, right? And then the concept of metacognition. So deontology and teleology can be part of your metacognition strategy. Am I justifying my actions based on the outcome or based on my duty?
But no matter what, we do need to justify our actions for ourselves, like how we're like.
Because we don't have to.
Okay.
We
just do it?
No. Many of us don't even.
All right.
We can probably function day to day without any justification whatsoever because we don't run up against the boundary.
I know a bunch of those people that just kind of float around and do stuff.
And that's fine. It's working. It's an adaptive strategy. It works.
Yeah.
However, if you're challenged, or if you have a disagreement with somebody, if you're challenged because you bump up against some boundary, now that boundary could be somebody's internal boundary, that boundary could be a guardrail, right? That boundary could be an enforcement of a rule in a classroom, in a martial arts gym, on a basketball court.
Any rules or laws or boundaries, limits.
That's when you run into that disagreement, and then somebody asks you to justify yourself. Right, so your metacognition tool, your thinking about thinking, is am I thinking about what I'm doing more duty bound or outcome bound, more deontology duty or more teleology outcome? Because that can then help you when you come into this friction point. When you come into this friction point, you can recognize it at that stage that somebody else might be more in the other one than you are.
See, when we originally started, I thought it was one of these things where there's going to be a binary of thought, where there's a majority on this side or a minority on this side, and it feels like we're going into a conversation where they're tools in a toolbox, where we need to be looking at these things not as separate things, but as things in a grouping that we can utilize to understand really ourselves and the world around us and how we're interacting with it, which is really nice because understanding that picking or recognizing which side you're thinking on or trying to justify is not necessarily wrong or right. It's just where you are.
Yeah.
And in doing that, you can understand really, I don't know if motivation is the correct word, but the motivations towards your actions and like why you were doing it in the first place, and then going and understanding why someone else would have friction for you doing that action, and their mindset and where they are on that side.
You're using the term motivation, and I'm using the term underlying assumption.
Okay.
Right? Your motivation can generate from your underlying assumption. Right? So, yeah, these are different things that have been described. If they've been described, they're phenomena that have been identified and then described, and then they can be passed on in some way through language. Now, what I'm attempting to say, as you've noted, is that they're tools. You identify where you are, and when there's a disagreement, is somebody coming from the same place? So you can have two deontological people disagreeing because they disagree on the deontology. They disagree on the duty. We think there's a different duty. Right. So it's
understanding that that's where your argument's going to be. It's going to be about the duty versus going over here, going, oh, you're talking. No, I'm not. I'm talking about duty.
So what are we actually in conflict about?
Yes.
Right. So what lives underneath the superficial dressing? So the clothes that our argument wears. What is the thing that supports the clothes? What's the thing that supports the more superficial layers? I have a desire and a drive to consistently get deeper. I don't seem to do well with the superficial details, or I don't seem to appreciate them the way other people do.
Okay.
Right? How I feel about clothes and how I feel about clothes with buttons. Right? Like we, in our society as it stands, we take you more seriously if you have buttons down the middle of your shirt. Now, if those buttons stop halfway,
it's less serious.
Yeah, I have to laugh at you, right? So let's just say you're wearing a suit, or a blazer with a t-shirt, or let's say you're wearing a blazer with a shirt with a collar, and it's got a closing mechanism all the way down the middle, collar, whole deal, but it's Velcro.
Or just zipper.
Right? This is something that our society has done, right? If you're wearing the right piece of clothing, it says that you agree with the underlying assumption of something, that buttons show status or show seriousness. Right? Now, I don't seem to enjoy the superficial details. That's me. I seem to appreciate the deeper underlying structures because they allow me to understand that I'm coming from a certain place and somebody else is coming from another place. So I don't have to fight with them. I can just acknowledge that they're coming from that place.
Okay.
Now, if they try to overrun me, I'll fight with them. Right? Now, if in that conflict we both acknowledge where we're coming from, my experience is that a lot of the disagreement dissolves. Like, oh, you're coming from there, I'm coming from here. That's cool, man. Hey, can I learn something from you? Versus if you're trying to overrun me, and I understand all the underlying concepts or underlying assumptions that I have,
but I don't.
You don't even understand that they exist, and I can call yours. In calling yours, I'm probably going to make you double down. I'm probably going to make you dig deeper into it, right? So it's a really challenging thing because when somebody doesn't recognize that those things are there and they don't understand what their underlying assumptions are, then we can have challenges when somebody else tries to call you on it or tries to identify it on your behalf because you didn't identify it yourself, so you should be defensive. Right? I'm telling you what you are. How can you tell me what I am? So we have this, but in having this conversation, we can identify that you may be more in one, more in the other. It allows you to understand the underlying assumption of your position, classify it in some way, describe it in some way, justify it in some way, so that when you're having those frictions with other people, you can start to understand where they actually are or where they may be. Because you can't choose where somebody else is, but where they may be. And it's a tool to navigate through this problem or through a problem that might exist. Like I said, though, if you don't bump up against boundaries, you don't ever have to justify anything. Just don't bump up against boundaries.
That's really the problem, is anytime you encounter a boundary and need to justify something.
Yes. Now, are you justifying your actions more duty-based, more outcome-based, depending on what's going on, right?
So it seems like in the attempt for this intelligence and where we're going in this idea, it seems like understanding these concepts and these ideas really just help us understand the day-to-day boundaries and limitations that we encounter, and anytime we encounter friction, to understand better why it exists and how to manage our way through it.
And that doesn't mean simply interpersonal interactions. It could mean how you're reading a book. Right? Are you angry at the book? I get angry at the radio.
Okay.
Right? There was a very recent period where when I got angry at the radio, I yelled. But I'm the only one in the car and the radio can't hear me. So I had to re-examine myself. I'm like, okay, you're something's going on here. You're disagreeing with something that's being said.
Yeah.
And you're yelling at a radio. What's wrong with you? So now I get mad, and although I'm by myself, I don't yell anymore. I just change the station, right? But I can understand where it's coming from because the thing that's setting me off is the underlying assumption of the information being presented to me through the radio.
It's not the radio itself.
No, it has nothing to do with it. It's what's being broadcast over the radio and the underlying assumptions of the person broadcasting, or the people broadcasting, or the people who are telling the broadcaster what to say.
You should tell that to people who throw their phone across the room. It's like
that happens less because phones are more expensive, or I think it happens less. I don't know if I'm right, but you know. Like
but no, that sounds like a perfect example where someone is mad at the person or thing they're consuming on their phone, and they get mad at their phone and whip it across like they're physically hurting the person on the other end.
The phone has nothing to do with it, right? It's like, oh, so it's just to understand, the underlying assumptions. Now, if we better understand these underlying assumptions, and these Deontology and Teleology aren't the only ones, right? So we'll have more discussions about those as we go forward, but to understand them and to be able to build a cogent argument to justify anything, right? So teleology and deontology are a part of that base assumption or set of base assumptions for any argument or any position. So when you can start to understand those, you can get through most things better. You know, trying to learn a new skill, right? Is learning it more duty-based? Is learning it more...
I like how you said base, though, because it's going to be a foundation. It's going to be that base and that center anchor where you're going to be, always kind of going there and then spreading out to further ones.
And now as we go forward in subsequent discussions, right, we're going to continue building the base. And then once we've built the base, our conversations are going to include those things.
Well, hopefully in an attempt to do that.
Yeah. So now, we've come to a point where we seem to have done a decent job describing, discussing these concepts. So we'll cut it off for now, and then we'll come back to it with another set of these things.
Sounds good.
All right.